Good morning, everyone, and I say, yes, indeed, good morning, because we are 10 in the morning today.
Yeah, that's what's going on.
Yeah, that's what, that's a little different. And welcome to the House Bill 36 and Task Force on Alcohol Pricing and Addiction Services. Can we get a roll call, please?
Senator Solomon,
Here.
Senator Knope, see him in the, come back to him. Chair Sanchez,
Present.
Representative Reschke,
Present by video.
Chief Doug Barrett,
Present.
Vaughn Berry, Rob Corbett, oh, I can see him.
Yeah.
Here.
There it is.
Annalise Dolph,
Here.
Jamie Floyd,
Here.
Dr. Tom Jean,
Here.
Todd Jeter,
Here.
Sean Colmer,
Here.
Sarah Lochner,
Here.
Janet McCamey,
Here.
Director Prince,
Here.
Marcus Reed,
Here.
Jason Renaud,
Here.
Danelle Romaine,
Here.
Valara Salazar,
Here.
Aaron Sarnoff Wood.
Here.
Quorum is present.
You, everyone. Process. Is there any discussion or concern about the ongoing? No, I think we're good. That'd be very cool. Keep bringing it up just in case things shift or change. All good.
And Aaron wanted to go over those questions, but you.
Yes, Aaron, I would really like us to hear the presentation that we have in the boards first, and then we can get to those questions if we have time. I'm sorry, I just really feel like I want to give as much sort of energy to this piece as we can possibly. So thank you for that. Because despite the fact that we are a little bit early on any of the other things, I feel like we have given a lot of time to a lot of different issues, and I want to make sure that the industry has time to put those out, because there will obviously be questions. So, economic state of beer, wine and cider industries, contributions and challenges. Lester Jones. Lester Jones is online. Oh, there you go, sir.
I'm here. Would you, how would, I have some slides that I like would share with the people. Do you want me to do that from my laptop? And
No, I think we can figure that out. Just give us a second.
Either you can do it, or I can take control from here and you can tell me to advance the slides. It's up to you.
you take control and I will say I will say next, and hopefully it won't come up too often in my talk.
Okay, one moment. All right, ready to go.
Hey, can everybody see that?
What?
The speaker sound for his president.
Am I good for audio?
Yeah.
All right. So I will start talking, and I guess we'll reserve the questions for later. I have about I have a handful of slides. Not all of them are, some of them are simple and a couple of them are a little bit more difficult, but I will do my best to explain them to you. My name is Lester Jones. I am the chief economist and vice president of analytics at the National Beer Wholesalers Association. My job is to count cases of beer, wine, spirits, and cider, and on all those other good things, and put them in the context of the economic and demographic landscape. I've been doing this for about 20 years, and I've done this for both the beer distribution side, the retail side, and the manufacturing or supplier side with brewers and such. Next slide, please. So many of you already know that, alcohol beverage is a big deal in the U.S. economy. It represents almost 2% of gross domestic product. And within the state of Oregon, it's a $17.2 billion economic impact. When you look at the beer side and you look at the wine and spirit sides, it comes together as $17.2 billion, hundreds of thousands of jobs, over $100,000 of wages, and total taxes of about $1.9 billion. Now, keep in mind, these are from the Beer Serves America study, as well from the wine and spirits side of the industry. So we bring these two studies together to talk about the total economic impact, and that goes from basically from farm to table. If you think about it, it's the agricultural, it's the barley, it's the hops, it's the corn, it's the wheat, it's the glass manufacturing, the canning, the glass, the kegs, and then into retail with bars, taverns, restaurants, grocery stores, convenience stores, all the hundreds of thousands of places that we can buy alcohol beverages and consume alcohol beverages. And all of that together is what makes that economic impact. And that's why it's so important when you look at policy and you look at the industry, you look at all of the places, all the people and all the businesses that are impacted by policy changes. Next slide. Many of you know, or some of you may not know, I'm assuming I'm speaking to, a group of people who are relatively familiar with the alcohol beverage industry. But one of the things that's so fascinating about the industry is the dynamic nature of it. When you look at how beer once upon a time was the preferred beverage of choice, we've become very much more over the decades what we call an omnibibulous bunch of drinkers. We drink across many different segments. And this is a Gallup poll series. It says, do you most often drink beer, wine, or liquor? And as you can see, back in 1992, there was a lot of dispersion between the segments. But as time has gone, has worked its way, we see people are much more likely to drink across all segments of beer, wine, spirits, and even ciders. And now we have things like sakis and meaderies and sojus and so many other types of classifications of alcohol that are just beyond those basic beer, wines, and spirits. But the story here is that it's a dynamic market. It's always changing, and the preferences of people are actually changing as well. Next slide. This is one of my complicated slides, and I apologize for it. It is in the form of a stoplight. So green is over-indexed and reds are under-indexed. And when we look at the alcohol beverage market and its interaction with things like marijuana here, there's a lot of stories to be told and a lot of things that are changing. I have the age groups down the first column, 21 to 24, all the way down to 70 years and older. The question is past use. So the survey is about 200,000 people. So Scarborough Research is a media research company. They do panel surveys that cover almost 200,000 households between June of 2022 and October of 2020. It's just a very in-depth study that encompasses a lot of different households. I like it just because of the depth and the breadth that it has across the country. And it does ask for past month reported use, and you put the data in the context of an index. So for example, 21 to 24 is an index of 86 in that very first upper left-hand data point of 86. It means that it means that 21 to 24% is 5.2% of the beer drinkers, but they're 6.1% of the population. So you look at the relative strength of the demographic group relative to how much they actually participate in any one of these segments for past month use. And so that number of 21 to 24 for beer shows that, 21 to 24s don't drink a lot of beer relative to the rest of the population. In fact, if you go all the way down to the bottom of the column and you see the 82 number, 21 to 24-year-olds in this country drink like their grandparents. It's an amazing outcome. And it's part of that. When I go back 10 years, certainly didn't look like this, but this is kind of how things are changing. When you go over and you look at used cannabis, 21 to 24 index at 147, that's 50% higher than their demographic group would imply. At the very bottom where I have that gray, that's the percent of total. So what it says is beers consumed by about 40% of the population, spirits at 43%, wine at 31%, cannabis at 13%, and then the people within this survey that tend to mix beer and weed and I put weed, beer and cannabis at 7%, spirits and cannabis at 9% and 8%. So it just gives you an idea of just how dynamic this whole market is in terms of age and types of segments that people are consuming. A lot of this has to do with, 21, 24s are coming in to the alcohol beverage market and less intense than they did. And that's part of, if you look at monitoring the future and you look at alcohol use in school, you can see it's way down in some of those surveys that like monitoring the future does in the NIH is that, underage drinking has become a lot less. And that's actually coming into the marketplace as they become legal drinking age consumers across the economy. And meanwhile, you can see how, the past use cannabis for 21 to 34-year-olds is through the roof. And then it kind of tails off as you go through your age demographic groups. Fun slide. Super informative just because it gives you a sense of where all these products play out across the demographic spectrum of age cohorts. Next slide, please. I just wanted to hit down and it wasn't there. Next slide. Okay, part of this is that you can see that beer, spirits is relatively over-indexed relative to beer. A lot of that has to do with pricing. Beer is a very expensive product to make. It's not distilled. It's naturally heavier. It requires a lot more inputs than things like spirits. So when you look at the yellow line, which is the total consumer price index, and you look at the blue line, which is the consumer price index for beer specifically, beer, just by the nature of its product and how it's made and how it's produced and where it's sold, tends to keep up with inflation because otherwise everyone would be bankrupt because it's such both a labor, capital, and input intensive business. Whereas wine and spirits tend to be a little bit have not kept up with inflation over time. But then again, they have a very different type of economic profile in terms of how they're made, produced, sold, and shipped. Next slide. So one of the things that I do for the last 20 years has spent a lot of time digging into what products are sold, what they represent in terms of their ABV, their average alcohol by volume, and how it plays out against the population. And it does vary. It varies everything from a low of 2.4 up to a high of 2.6. This assumes if you take all the beer, all the wine, all the spirits, and all the cider, and all the RTDs, and you multiply them by their industry average weighted ABV. So beer, for example, is about 4.6%. Sometimes it's 4.7, sometimes it's 4.5. It varies year to year depending on what's out in the marketplace for people to consume, but it's a dynamic number. It's certainly not a static number. It changes every year. We've seen some years where, craft beer has been very popular and there tend to be a little bit higher ABVs, and in other years they come down a little bit, and so the average ABV is very different across beer, wine, spirits. What I do is I convert everything into ethanol, pure 100% alcohol, base alcohol, divided by the population. And you can see year to year, there's fluctuations and there's changes. And that's really important. And also in 2021, at the height of COVID, was one of our highest supply years. And since then, we're on a 2-year secular decline in that total alcohol marketplace across beer, wine, and spirits. If you look at the 2022 and 2023 numbers, beer was down a lot. It suffered huge losses in volume, as did wine as well. So there's segments that have been doing well, but haven't been doing well. But for the peak that we saw in 2021, when there was a lot of purchasing at home, people were buying large quantities of beer, wine, and spirits. They were putting them in their pantries. They weren't necessarily consuming them. They were just kind of almost hoarding them because supply chain issues and fear of going out and when people not really sure what they're going to get. And that's why you saw that spike. But since then, things have kind of come down and slowly returned to some sense of normalcy of where we actually expected. But make no doubt about it, we're in a 2-year decline in the alcohol beverage market. Next slide. This is kind of that same data, just in pie charts, 2012 versus 2023. Back in 2012, we had beer, wine, and spirits basically, and beer was the predominant beverage of choice, as you saw in that Gallup poll data. It came through in my data that I created myself with a 52 share. But as you can see, over time, fast forward to 2023, those shares have certainly shifted. Back in 2012, we really didn't have much of a measurable cider segment, but now we do at about 1% of total ethanol. We have this brand new low proof RTD canned cocktail world, which is about 2% of the market. And then beer sits at 44%, higher proof spirits at 38%, and wine sitting around 15%. But the thing is they're shifting shares, lots of competition amongst these beverages as we go through time, and also some introductions of some new segments that necessarily weren't even there, a decade ago. They were there, don't get me wrong, no offense to the cider people, they just weren't measuring at a magnitude that would put them on the chart. Next slide. All right, so like I said, the beer business took a beating over the last 2 years. What happened is everything was kind of going wrong. It was on a slow, gradual decline because of competition from so many different beverages. But when we hit COVID, the bottom fell out, and there was this rush to fill pantries, which the industry did. But then once they got to that late of 2021 period, and everyone's pantries were full, that's when the beer market fell apart, because there's only so much you can put in your pantry or your refrigerator at home, and it's full. And what we've seen is just this persistent decline month over month of declining total malt beverage supply numbers in the United States. And if you look at the next slide, it's not as dramatic for the state of Oregon, but the total shipments kind of look like they were doing okay all the way up through about January of 2020, holding about 250,000 barrels. But since then, those numbers have certainly fallen off dramatically over the period of 2023 and into at least the first month of January 24. So once again, a lot of change and a lot of competition, and consumers are certainly reacting to this post-COVID world. There's no doubt. A lot of this probably has to do with all those things, everything from, people, the impacts of cannabis, sober curious, non-alcs, functional beverages. You can only put so much liquid into your body in a given day. We are constrained by our stomachs in any given day. And so just the sheer amount of the stuff that's out there for us continues to impact the beer market even into 2024. Next slide. And where you put your beer and where you can buy your beer is also pretty important. What we've seen is that, we saw this period of time from the end of the Great Recession, 2008, 2010. You remember those bad days? That was what we called the Great Recession then. And what happened following that was just this economic expansion period where even the beer industry and places where you could sell beer actually grew, and it kind of got out of control even in 2016 and 2017 when we kind of hit this peak retail. It was kind of like when you heard about Bed Bath & Beyond selling beer next to vacuum cleaners, and everyone's like, this doesn't sound right. It seems that things have gotten out of control. And even in 17 and 18 it did, but the market started bringing things into perspective in 18 and 19. And then of course when COVID hit, it blasted the industry all the way back to 2008 in terms of the places that we all go and buy alcohol beverages. And since then, we've been on a slow path of recovery, but even into 2023, it's about where we were in 2010. So once again, this market and where you can actually place beer and sell beer and buy beer is very much limited back by all of these constraints of what came out of COVID and also the economics of the time. Next slide. So, the thing is we have a study, we have the Center for Alcohol Policy. We look at it and we look at the regulatory environment we live in, and we look at the economics and the economic impact. And what we do find is most Americans are kind of happy with how we manage and control the alcohol beverage industry. About 89% of Americans agree it's important that we regulate this industry. More than 8 in 10 Americans agree alcohol is different than other products and should be regulated differently. 84%, you can read these things. You don't necessarily need me to read them for you. But, overarching is we have a very effective and productive regulated market system that creates jobs, creates wages, creates taxes, and generates all this. So we have economic players engaged in doing business according to a certain set of playbooks. And for the most part, it's working pretty well. And as we play it out, and consumers seem to be pretty happy with how things are playing out. And if you'd like the access to the study, you can use that link there to click on it, and you can read the full PDF that has all of the results of how people kind of look at the regulated alcohol beverage market. It's a very nice study to pay attention to as you think about alcohol policy. Where do you do? Next slide. And it's tough. I mean, I'm an economist, and I've spent my life in a regulated industry looking at the costs and benefits and all the things that play in the alcohol beverage space. I mean, everything from drunk driving to underage consumption to how it plays out in the marketplace and in public health. But the reality is that this July poll from the Gallup poll from 2022, continues to kind of affirm that, alcohol has people have a viewpoint about alcohol. It is somewhat negative in that, they feel that it has a problem. It needs to be regulated and looked after in terms of its impact on society, and then actually how it impacts people as well. But once again, this is a product that you all know and know so well. Has been around for 10,000 years. It's been part of our culture. It's been part of our society. It's been part of our laws across time and across countries and across demographic groups. So it's no shock that you see this, but it's also no shock that when you talk to people about the regulation and how we work and control the market, that it needs to be paid attention to. Next slide. I'm an economist, and you look at the health consequences of something like the CDC reported chronic liver disease, and a lot of time in a lot of the news you may have heard coming out of COVID is how we all drank ourselves into new livers, and the excessive consumption and all the negative stories that came out of alcohol throughout the COVID period. But never once in any of those stories did I see anyone even put up this graph to say, this problem really started in 2010 when, we went for a whole decade of almost below 10. The rate of chronic liver disease was below 10. It wasn't until 2010 that this thing started growing. And that was and it's not a single variable problem. It's what in economics we call a multi-variable problem. It's the demographics, it's the types of alcohol you're drinking, it's the obesity, it's the opioid epidemics, it's excessive pharmaceutical use, and it's an aging population. All of those variables go into the equation and into the analysis of how we look at harm in general and how we look at these impacts. So we have 2 years of declining alcohol statistics in the U.S. now, and I can tell you that little orange line is not going to go down, even though we were perfectly willing to say it was going up while alcohol was going up in 20 and 21. But now that it's going down, you need to have those statistical significant interrelationships amongst all of the variables to make an honest and accurate assessment of what is happening in the data. Next, please. All right, I think I'm coming up on 4 minutes. There's a lot of negativity in what I just showed you, but just remember that people love occasions, and alcohol has been part of special occasions for centuries and across time and across countries. Like I said, when this question, I think I use this frequently in my talks because when you ask people how alcohol interacts in their life, it does come out as a special occasion. And, putting a damper on those occasions is, not, not fun. So, just remember, for fun. I mean, even the dogs like it, guys. Next. I try to, it's heavy stuff, so I just try to make it light, just to make sure people are paying attention and not dozing off. Nothing like a picture of a dog to get everyone, make them lift their heads up from their phone. All right, so 1:27, I'm almost out of time here, but literally, guys, think about this as you play out the policies and the implications of the policies. Remember that, we are still a dynamic population. We are indeed getting older. That millennial group, which dominates the US population right now, is slowly moving into a much more different period of life. I do believe it's what I call the omnibibulous period of life. When you look at the data and you look at how kind of 30 to 45-year-old people, 30 to 45 to 50-year-old people consume, they consume a much broader variety of projects. We will be headed to a much more omnibibulous state in this country. It will be very different. And the dynamics of what we drink, where we drink, and how we drink are certainly going to be at in a state of flux. So it's the economics are important. I understand that there's this idea of taxing the product, but the product is kind of already contributing lots of taxes through the economic development. When you look at the number of small independent craft brewers, wineries, and distilleries out there, they all serve as almost a place that provides a higher end, much more sustainable product in the U.S. economy, and keeping them alive and generating economic activity, I think is very important, even to the overall benefit of the industry as well. Next slide. I think that's my last slide, and that's my time. Certainly open to any questions that you may have about these data or any of the conclusions I presented to you. I'm certainly open for any discussion there.
Great, thank you. Any questions? I'm gonna look online first if I can see. Oh, yeah. I don't see who's the one. Todd. There you go.
Hi, thank you. I had a couple of questions about the slides. One of them was you stated that during the pandemic, folks were buying a lot more alcohol, but it was staying in their pantries. They weren't consuming that, and I was wondering where you might have drawn that conclusion from.
It was the subsequent years where, if you look at like the liquor industry today, they've noticed that their sales are way down, and even within the distilled spirits industry, they're like, well, people just have pantries at home that are still full from COVID. I've seen that come out in several different investor calls. I've also noted in the if you look at the census of wholesale trade, I didn't show that slide, but if you look at the census of wholesale trade, you saw wholesale inventories growing exponentially throughout 22 and 2023, and they're still elevated. And those are the beer distributors, the wine and spirits distributors that are sitting on these excessive amounts of inventory that just don't get sold through into retail. And still we have that manufacturing side that's pushing it in. And quite frankly, the middle tier of the alcohol beverage market is full. And many of the households, I saw one analyst did a pantry survey, and most people reported having, 3 to 6 months of alcohol in supply at home. And that's 2 years after the pandemic when I saw that study. So there's a lot of evidence that a lot of product remains in households. And since, beer is a perishable product, after 6 months or so, you probably don't want to drink that beer. Wine, most wine is produced for immediate consumption. There's a little bit, ask a wine expert, but some of the very small share of the wine industry is set aside for long-term storage. The majority of the wine is short-term consumption. It's the spirits industry that really took off during COVID that doesn't expire. You know, you can keep that stuff around for a very long time in your pantry. And I think that's what we found coming into 22 and 23. And that was a little bit of a shock to the spirits industry as well. And that's why they were down last year.
And that's, I'm trying to make sense of, and so that goes on into, I saw the slide showing that, I think it was in 2021 that, that showed that beer consumption went down.
Yeah.
But I think I didn't see, or maybe I missed, that would be interesting to see is what did spirit consumption look like over the same time period? I noticed that later in the chronic disease slide, one of the variables that was called out at the bottom was that there was a shift to more concentrated forms of alcohol may represent an increase in problematic drinking that would make a lot of sense in lieu of the increased environmental stressors that folks were experiencing around the time of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's especially in the public health space, you see very little interest in segmenting out kind of the lower AB fermented beverages from the higher AB distilled spirits in terms of what are those impacts over time and how have those shares really had an impact on public health. Alcohol is typically looked at and it's just plain old alcohol when in fact it comes from very many different sources and different types of fermentation and processing. Thank you though. I appreciate your comment, Todd.
Rob, did you get your question answered? Did you want?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Annalise.
Thanks, Lester. This is really fascinating, and I hope we'll get your slides. Annalise Dolph, I'm the director of the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission. I can't see the slide, but I'm curious, the one about retail establishments selling beer down nationally, what's behind that?
Oh, it was a lot of small independent companies closed their doors during COVID, and they have yet to come back. So it really left the large chain retailers to really grow in the post-COVID environment. And it made sense because when all that economic stimulus was out there, the larger chains that had, accounting departments and, had people that could actually pursue that stimulus, they were the ones that survived and grew, whereas the small mom and pops just were like, check please, I'm out. So it was definitely a big shift into larger chain and off-premise, away from at-home consumption, people to buy to take home, while the on-premise small independent places kind of vanished, and we're still watching them slowly recover in this post-COVID world. And quite frankly, how we interpret alcohol consumption, we like to think what gets bought, gets consumed, but we really don't know what happens inside the home. We know we know who makes it, we know where it goes geographically, we know what kind of stores it goes into, but once it gets purchased and goes home, that's where it becomes a lot more murkier in consumption. And that's why when you look to like the growth of alcohol beverage inventories in the wholesale distribution tier, you're like, oh, it's not there. It's growing here because it's not going out the house there. It's still in the home, right? It's still in the pantry. It's still in their liquor cabinet. There's 2 fingers in 100 bottles, is what I like to say. As everyone had a little bit and then left a couple fingers and just pushed it away. You know what I mean? Fingers in the bottle. Inside alcohol beverage industry lingo, I'm throwing at you. So that it's definitely an interesting it's an interesting dynamic, especially as we watch these on-premise established recover. We see lots of people out and about. We know that from an economic standpoint, people are traveling, people are going out, they're eating. We know that there are a lot more beverages to choose from across the functional space, across the non-alcohol beverage space, even now across the the adjacent to alcohol, the CBDs, the Delta 9s, the Delta 10s, and all those other kind of beverages that are out there. So this market is very, very dynamic and very competitive. It's important to keep an eye on it because it is changing every day.
Yes. Lots of questions in the room.
I think Tom.
Yeah, thanks. Tom Jean, OHA. Thank you, Lester. Appreciate your presentation and thanks for introducing me to the word omnifibulous.
Yeah.
Ah, it's a fun word.
Yeah, great word. I just had a couple of things to highlight. So you're absolutely right that the chronic liver disease, when you look at those rates, that is not just alcohol. There are lots of other things in there. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease are increased significantly, and that can lead to very serious liver disease. Hepatitis is another example. So that's exactly why when we gave our presentation, we looked at the alcohol-related death rates, which includes alcoholic liver disease, but also a whole bunch of other chronic and acute conditions and injuries that are specifically tied to alcohol. So I think that's really a more specific indicator than just chronic liver disease in general. And then there were a couple of your graphs and charts that I wanted to make a comment on. So the first one was the one that showed the inflation and I think showing how beer prices were tracking the consumer price index fairly closely over recent years. I just wanted to point out that on that note that the wine and liquor on that were significantly below inflation. So collectively, that kind of means that alcohol is getting cheaper. Beer is pretty typical, but if the other ones are going at a lower, if their prices are increasing at a lower rate, that kind of means that the real cost of alcohol on average has gone down over that period. And then a couple of your graphs, I just wanted to point out too, for anybody looking at the slides later, totally fine to do this, but you had cut off the y-axis on a bunch of those, which tends to kind of zoom in on the changes. That's a very common tactic, and it's fine as long as people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it tends to exaggerate the differences. If you look at the whole bar, it would look like a more minor trend, but still, you presented clear data showing that some of the consumption data has gone down a bit. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you for your comments.
Solara Salazar, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to point out, as somebody who does know where the alcohol went during COVID, I run an alcohol and drug treatment center, and we ask very pointed questions in our assessment and pre-screening process. And what I can tell you is that 100% of folks who admitted during COVID reported a massive increase in alcohol consumption related to COVID, the stresses, isolation.
Thank you.
Lester, this is Craig. I'm the director of the organ control. Thank you so much. My question is about categories. Like you said, things are moving so dynamically, and the drinking patterns, and then we're seeing these higher ABV malted beverages, higher ABV wine beverages. Just in your slides, are those categorized as beer and wine? I'm thinking of your White Claws and some of those other products.
Yeah, I look at everything as kind of their source fermentation. So a grain, a malt beverage is a malt-based beverage, and that would include a White Claw or a seltzer product. A High Noon, for example, is a vodka-based seltzer, so that would be in the liquor business, even though it is part of a winery making it. And I've yet to find any Bartles and James wine coolers yet to throw in there. But yes, I follow the core ingredients into those beverages. So and yeah, some of those malt beverages have gotten up into 8-9%. Yes.
And as an economist, and I think for everyone at this table, industry, public health control, we're all encouraged public health wise by the reduction in youth drinking. But from an industry perspective, what do you see the industry doing about that reduction for youth, the younger people and the substitution of cannabis? And are these products that are kind of new products to some of us or older, is that kind of a response to that change? How do you see that from an economics?
Well, the beer, back in the 80s, when the legal drinking age went, to 21, the alcohol beverage industry, was set. They were pretty clear that we will wait till you're 21. We don't want underage consumers. We don't want to sell to underage consumers. We're perfectly willing to wait until everyone is legal drinking age. And, and they offered a responsible, moderate drinking message. How that played out in the last 10 years with the legalization of cannabis and kind of the normalization of it in our society, certainly is changing everyone's behavior. I'm not a representative of any of the alcohol manufacturers. I don't know what they think and what they talk about behind closed doors, but I think they're perfectly willing to let their products stand on their own, and I don't think they need to go out and try to compete directly in that that space that is slowly sees more and more people, as you saw in the younger demographic groups, engaging in cannabis use. Does that answer your question, or was it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just, I'm new to this space, and I'm just looking at the categories and the ABV and seeing just the drinking patterns are just shifting pretty quickly, and what the ABV, what people drink is just all shifting quick. And so I'm just trying to get my head.
We have this industry that is very innovative. I mean, the idea that for decades we just had basically a non-alcoholic beer that was offered up in an on-premise establishment. So someone who was a designated driver could have an O'Doul's, or they could have a Coors non-alc, or they could have a St. Pauli Girls non-alc. And those were products that were put out there in the bars and restaurants for people to have an alternative. And then all of a sudden you have a company, this athletic brewing company, that came around and said, well, you know what? We can create a category of NA beers, non-alcoholic beers, that taste really good, that aren't just for the designated driver, but for everybody. And then lo and behold, you have a whole new direction of the industry that it's on. And now we have, entire bars that are set up around, non-alcoholic cocktails, which are just basically a juice bar. But, we're going to call it a non-alcoholic cocktail bar because we're making non-alcoholic cocktails instead of juices. I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but once again, the ability of the marketplace to create new opportunities and expand and grow, which for me as an economist goes back to economic development, goes back to jobs, goes back to wages, goes back to taxes, goes back to all the good things, the good things of our market that creates activity for us.
Okay, so can we, 1 second, folks. We are clearly going to go over time. That's okay. It's totally fine. And we have several questions online as well. I know everybody wants to jump in, but I want to make sure that folks online get an opportunity to ask questions, since I wasn't paying attention to them. So it's just brought to my head. So
I just wanted to add one quick thing, if that was all right, around wine, which an ABV, some of that, especially for Oregon wine, is impacted by the climate and climate change. So for winemaking, you're trying to balance the alcohol and acid and fruits and all of those different things. So some of that is, because of the changing climate, and that
okay.
You can have the people go online.
Yeah, let me get to them and then I will get to you. Malik, is that there?
Yes, I think you, this is Mazen Malik. I'm with the Legislative Revenue Office. I'm an economist like you. I was wondering, through your research, were you able to establish type of knowledge about price elasticity of the different products, like beer is different than wine and hard liquor, and did that change through time? Has it been constant? What's your read on these issues?
Yeah, I mean, there's literally thousands of academic research papers out there on the own price elasticity, the cross price elasticity, and the income elasticity of all these products. I could certainly, if you want to shoot me an email, I'll share that research with you, because there's a lot out there. I certainly, if you can get my email, I'll gladly share that with you. It's very fun work, but the elasticities have remained pretty constant over time, and that's part of the reason you see you continue to see more entrants into the market.
Michelle.
Thank you, Lester. I have a question about consumption patterns and some of these new products. So you mentioned that consumers, are occasion-based
Yes.
participants in alcohol, and now we see a rising popularity in low and no alcohol products, as well as some of the high noon products. And I'm curious what the interaction is. Is it the same consumer? Are these different consumers? Are they making choices about occasions?
Absolutely. The thing about the U.S. population is that every year it's different. And when you go back to that last slide I showed you about the omnibiblious consumer, I mean, we literally, every year we have 4 million new people turning 21 years old and entering kind of that legal drinking age market where they can go out and consume alcohol beverages and purchase them and everything else. And at the same time, we have people on the older spectrum that are kind of slowly declining on their consumption for whatever reasons, for age or health, or just you tend to consume a lot less as you age out. So absolutely, I mean, the dynamic nature of the American consumer and the market system that drives new brands, new innovations, new companies, and new places to go and buy are all in play here. It's not a static world that people think about when we look at just people popping a beer and cutting the lawn. I mean, or sitting down and watching a football game or having a glass of wine at the table. There's a lot more beyond all of that I spend all my day diving into and explaining to people.
Thank you. Danelle, I'm going to allow Rep. Reschke to have the privilege of going next because I think he has to leave. Representative.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. I appreciate that. And Lester, thank you for your time and expertise today. My question has to go with if you have any data that shows or doesn't show when consumption increases or decreases in either beer or wine or spirits, does the abuse of those substances proportionately increase or decrease along with that trend?
Wow. I don't have anything. I don't have that offhand. I'd certainly interesting to kind of look at how those things play together. My assumption would be is that, alcohol abuse is probably consistent within the population over time. I mean, we know that a certain share of the population is susceptible to addiction. Addiction, as you know, is a medically defined disease. Yeah, and it impacts the U.S. population and, pretty consistently over time. It's almost like could you go back to some of these medical records and just see how many people, how often that diagnosis code comes up. Granted, we saw lots of stories around COVID. Some people many people coped with COVID in very different ways. Segment of the population that's predisposed to addiction and overindulgence and everything, not just in alcohol, certainly were impacted in very dramatic ways during that time. And, other people like my neighbor who sat on his Peloton bike and lost all the weight and looked like a you know, like yeah, a Greek god when he came out after 2 years of being locked up on a Peloton. Yeah, clearly things play out differently in the population, but I'd certainly entertain looking at that for you.
Thank you.
No.
Okay, Lester, elephant in the room. Can you talk about alcohol taxes? Do they work to reduce problem consumption? What do you know from your research in the various states?
So, you know, taxes do not, taxes impact taxes have an impact on the normal consumer. And the majority of consumers, 80 to 90% of them are moderate, reliable consumers of alcohol. They do it in a moderate, healthy way. That's just how the data play out. There's always a segment of the population that does not have that price elasticity or that price sensitivity, and they're not going to change their behavior no matter how you tax it. So what we do find is as you raise taxes up, you draw people away from the legal market, you push them into the black market, you push them into other close substitutes to that substance. So it's, you know, as a means of controlling public health, no, it's not going to stop the excessive abusive user of alcohol, whether it's cigarettes or, I mean, we see this in on the East Coast where cigarette taxes are incredibly high, and some of the northern states in the black market for cigarettes coming out of North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, you know, that whole underground highway on Interstate 95, which is just full of vans transporting tax-free cigarettes out of the South into the North, is insane. But, you know, the tax structure is such that it just creates a black market. And what you don't want to do is create a black market, because once you create a black market, you have forces that are beyond the regulatory control of the state, and you end up losing more than you certainly will gain without any real impact on the medical condition of addiction, which is what you ultimately started out to control.
Thank you. Get to Senator Solomon first, and then.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple questions regarding your slides. Thank you so much. And one of the ones that just came to me is when you mentioned the taxes that were raised in New York and how you saw an influx of illegal cigarettes coming into the market. I actually would be curious to see, when you're looking at that, where is the data that shows how much smoking dropped after that? I'm curious about that.
So smoking, yeah, I'd have to pull up. I mean, there's studies on the cross-border trade in the cigarette business, in the tobacco business. There's a bunch of studies that are done on that, and those just talk directly to the black markets that have been created around the excessive taxation of the product. I don't have the two studies side by side to say, hey, this started and what happened to that. But I'd have to look at that.
Yeah. Follow up, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you so much. It just came to me when you said that. I thought, oh, wait a minute, we could possibly see an example there. But one of the slides, I took a quick picture of it when you talked about, it was the perceived effect of alcohol use by a subgroup. And it showed the question was, what effect do you think the use of alcohol has on society, most people who drink? And I was just wondering, because you have very positive, somewhat negative, very negative, did you drill down even more to that to say, if they thought, where it says effect on alcohol on society, US adults 55%, did you drill down on what they meant by why they checked that box as somewhat negative?
It's the Gallup poll. That's not my survey. That's right off of the Gallup poll, and the Gallup poll every year does this in July. They run it kind of in the spring, and they publish in July and August that they have for different questions surrounding alcohol use and perception of alcohol. That was just me presenting their results. It wasn't my specific study. So I couldn't speak to the details.
Okay, no worries. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, question over here.
Hi, Sarah Lochner, representing the Association of Oregon Counties, but I work for the Oregon Coalition of Local Health Officials. So I wanted to summarize a little bit what I heard, and I invite you to correct my perception. And then I have a couple of questions. So I heard you say taxes don't impact the average consumer, that taxes are not going to stop the excessive, abusive user. And that taxes push a small segment of folks into the black market. So I want to know more about this black market. Who is this consumer and where are these products sold on the black market and what percentage of consumers? Is there any data to show what percentage go to the black market?
So no, it's a black market. We don't really, when you know black markets exist, for example, we know so just a little correction. So yes, taxes are going to impact people, right? So if you raise a tax, if you have two geographies and the tax is twice as high than the other geography, that impact will be this person making a conscious decision to go to the other geography. We see that literally the convenience store association showed that people will actually will drive further to save a nickel on gas than it's worth, right? And they're like, it's amazing how the human mind will turn around and go back a mile so they can save a nickel on gas, even though they spent more time and gas getting that saved. So there's no doubt in my mind that taxes influence people, in very profound ways, even to the extent that they will waste time and money trying to save a nickel on a gallon of gas. So if you raise taxes in one location and you don't raise it in another location, you will incentivize those people to move and change their buying habits. So so if all the taxes went up at once across the entire country and there's no outlet for them to go to, then we'd have a different story to talk about, because then suddenly you would see kind of alternatives and substitutes coming into play, because the economic reasoning of the consumer is probably going to make them think about how do I save that nickel. Okay, that aside. So what do we know about the black market? When you look at something like the cigarette trade on the Northeast corridor, where you have a lot of low tax cigarettes in the South, and then a lot of high cigarettes in the New England states where taxes are relatively high. There's evidence from alcohol, the tobacco folks that they find bands of cigarettes when they stop them and they open them up and there's full of unlicensed and untaxed cigarettes, and they know within the trade in like New York City that there's a lot of illegal sales. All of those data are out there, and they're much more in a story by story basis, because I don't think anyone sat down to really bring them all together in one final resting place to prove the point. So I relate to you the stories that I read about and I hear about, and that's what I'm telling you. I don't have a database of all the illegal black market transactions that occurred because of taxation in the United States. Be fun to have, certainly, if you could do that. We had the moonshine thing for a while when people were, all that moonshine was pretty popular down in the South when, but then all of a sudden it became cool to be a moonshiner, and they all decided that paying their taxes was actually better because I could get on a TV show.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Dr. Jim.
I don't know, Sarah, if you had more questions, but I had one follow-up. Just wanted to say that, Tom Gino, AJ, that there is an abundance of evidence that there is price elasticity demand for alcohol. When prices go up, consumption does tend to go down. And the people who are most sensitive tend to be young adults and So the people who maybe are least sensitive are likely to be people with alcohol use disorder. If they have the disease, they're physically dependent on it. But even they probably have some price sensitivity. So I think the important thing is to think longer term, big picture, even if raising taxes may not make a huge difference that year in consumption by the heaviest drinkers, it will reduce consumption by the lighter and youngest drinkers, and that really prevent them from getting to the point of alcohol use disorder. So I think we need to think about the long term, the bigger picture when we're thinking about pricing and consumption.
Okay, folks.
You know, so we could collect questions for Lester too, like we have for the other speakers, that
Okay.
can send them. You could
That
send
might not
to
be
him.
the worst idea at this point, because we are running seriously over, and I do want to give opportunity to ask questions, but so Senator Solomon, would, just because you're online and I want to.
Well, if you, in the interest of saving time, it was just a comment, so please move forward.
Thank you. I do actually have one question, which is very, just because, you know, it's always a good opportunity to have, at the end here, you know, questions get answered, but I didn't quite get the answer to this question. You mentioned, your slide about the retail establishments. My assumption is that meant actual businesses that were selling openly to the public. Is that correct?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it is. Those are licensed retail beer establishments.
That went down, the distribution from those licensed retail establishments went down, yes, in your slide. Does that take into consideration that reduction? Because it looked like a pretty stark reduction. Did that take into consideration at all the fact that Oregon and maybe other states have home delivery?
Very good question. I would imagine there's a little bit of impact from home delivery. I don't think it accounted for a large share of that decline, but I would, in a multivariable world, I would probably, before I did any study, I would probably reserve a little bit of that drop for the idea of home delivery. But once again, I don't see that whole e-commerce space has not really grown. I think I have to go back and look, so don't quote me, but I think the kind of alcohol beverage e-commerce space, which is kind of that home delivery world, it's kind of plateaued off in recent years. So, but yes, I don't have a definitive exact answer for you for how much or what the actual impact is.
All of that alcohol is still purchased from a licensed retail, so it wouldn't actually change that at all.
But
total consumption wouldn't go down based on that because there's no way around purchasing from a licensee. So there could be a difference in the amount of that total that is going via delivery, but the total purchase is still coming from a licensed retail. There's no way around that, just to be clear.
Well, I think that's why I asked the question, whether or not it was an open, like a business, open business, or something. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, if they're coming directly from the wineries, I don't know. I mean, it's still licensed. Yes, I appreciate all of that. That was why I asked the question. Thank you. So folks, if you all have additional questions for Mr. Jones, if you would please go ahead and send those forward. We'd love to get those answers as well. I think everybody would be thrilled to have that. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and attention to the detail here. We really do appreciate.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, everyone.
Yeah. Okay, goodness sakes, we're going to move on. See, so Ben Edmond, president of the Oregon Brewer Guild. Is everyone planning on going like together? We have a sort of a panel situation. Maria Ponzi and Michelle McGrath.
One at a time.
One at a time, please go for it.
Hi. My name is Ben Edmonds. Sorry. I'd like to thank Chair Sanchez and the other members of the task force for providing me and the other representatives the opportunity to talk about the state of our respective industries. My name is Ben Edmonds. I'm the brewmaster and partner in Breakside Brewery, just down the road here, one of the larger craft breweries in the state. I'm also president of the Oregon Brewers Guild. The OBG serves to promote and protect the interests of small breweries across the state. So I'm speaking today both from my personal experience running a brewery for 15 years in Portland, as well as an ambassador for breweries of all sizes and business models across the state. Slide, please. Here's a quick overview of what I'd like to cover in the next 12 minutes or so. I'll touch briefly on some of the cultural context for Oregon beer and move on to some big picture observations about the state of beer market in Oregon and nationally, much of which dovetails into what Lester was just speaking about. I'll dive into detail about what sort of costs our businesses typically see and what money that leaves or doesn't leave on the table. And finally, I'll touch on what I see as the alcohol industry's role as a responsible community partner in addressing addiction and treatment. I'm going to draw off my previous career as well as a former high school teacher. I'm not going to make sure that what I say out loud is not exactly what's on the slides here, so it's not a one-to-one match, so hopefully I've added a little more detail and granularity to some of those bullet points that are up there. Slide, please. Beer, wine, cider, distilleries are part of a cultural and economic force in Oregon that have driven tourism dollars to the state, created jobs, and offered family-friendly and community venues in every county and legislative district in the state. We host birthdays, makers markets, live music, family reunions, corporate get-togethers, political fundraisers, game nights, dog meetups, vaccination drives. Our businesses are multi-purpose community hubs. Beer is to Oregon as peaches are to Georgia, lobster is to Maine, or cheese is to Wisconsin. For decades, Portland has been known as Munich on the Willamette because of its high density of breweries, more at one point than any other city in the world. Our industry is an essential part of the agricultural and culinary fabric of Oregon, a point of pride and an attraction to the rest of the world. And none of this happened by coincidence. It was thanks to forward-thinking legislation, beginning with the Brew Pub Bill in 1985, that nurtured the regulatory landscape that allowed startup brew pubs and tap rooms to flourish. It's been reinforced by regulation that's allowed for self-distribution and retail expansion. For 40 years, Oregon's brewers, wholesalers, retailers, and legislators have worked together to give small businesses pathways to market, and the result is this rich, synergical heritage that we have today. To quote award-winning author Jeff Allworth, brewing has been a continuous fixture in the state since 1852. Oregon's hop fields, which produce more pounds of green cones than all other countries, save two, date back nearly as far. The USDA hop breeding program in Corvallis set the stage for a small brewery revival when it bred the Cascade hop in 1971. Oregon State University also houses the National Hop Germplasm Repository and a well-regarded research lab and fermentation science program, and the finest historical beer and hop archive this side of the Smithsonian. In 1934, Regional Northwest Brewery set up a malt house 10 miles from the Blitz Weinhard Brewery in downtown Portland that became a national resource for brewing malt to come to breweries across the country. Portland is home to the oldest homebrew shop in the country, a steel fabricator that made the country's first small batch brew house, and one of the first national yeast labs. The Pink Boots Society, the first organization dedicated to advocacy and education for women in the beer industry, was started in Portland in 2007 by former Eugene-based brewmaster Terry Ferendorf. And none of that touches on the diverse and exceptional breweries here, nor the annual celebration of fresh hops, and truly one of the most interesting seasonal events anywhere in the world. End quote. It behooves me also to say most breweries in the state are small. The average brewery produces just 11 barrels of beer per week and sells 3 kegs of beer per day. Oregon breweries are not large, faceless beverage companies. They are owner-operator businesses with heavy investment in labor and connect to local suppliers for hops, malt, yeast, packaging materials, fruits, and other key ingredients. We're craft artisans working with products from our part of the world. Breweries support and sustain local farmers and local agriculture. The Oregon beer industry is not just the brewers and brewery operators. It also includes the 4th and 5th generation hop farmers like the Goshis, the Crosbys, and the Colemans. And as the beer industry goes, so go their businesses. Slide, please. Despite all the accolades and world renown for our beers, we're weathering a very challenging, competitive, and mature marketplace right now. We're experiencing the long COVID of the beverage world. If the pandemic quickly kind of shifted things and unmoored us from all our normal operating logic, the 3 years since 2020 has shaken us with a much longer and more unpredictable aftermath. But that said, the takeaways are pretty straightforward. Sales are down, costs are up, and the things that are selling don't make us much money. What are the factors shaping that paradigm shift? Inflation, changes to individual social habits like going out less, generational differences in drinking habits, increased competition both in the number of breweries and across beverage categories. I'll go off script here for a second. Just one of the things that struck me about one of Lester's slides, going from the points of sale from 2010, that we're back at that kind of number for retail outlets for beer, per capita. In 2010, there were also only nationally about 1,800 breweries. Today, there's 9,000. So you can imagine what that squeeze does in terms of the retail outlets and pathways are cut off for, basically, you're splitting the pie a lot of ways. So all this puts a tremendous squeeze on our businesses. And the proof is in the pudding. Brewers Guild doesn't have an executive director or any paid staff right now because membership dues have lagged since 2020, which is why you get me here today. My own brewery, one that I think is considered a paragon success in this industry right now, had to rely on the state sponsored work share program this past winter to avoid laying off 20% of our staff due to unforeseen drop-offs in sales in October, November, December. I know I speak for many breweries in the state when I say that their businesses are hanging on by a thread. We're vulnerable, but we're passionate and committed to rebuilding our businesses and strengths in the industry. Slide, please. I believe there was some interest from task force members in understanding our costs and margins, so I've tried to make this slide lay out our costs as clearly as possible. So I've drawn off guild member data as well as my own brewery's financials to put this pie chart together. So for every barrel of beer that is produced, that's 31 gallons, but the average revenue to a brewer for 31 gallons of beer in Oregon is $349. If you break that down to a 6-pack, it means that a brewery effectively earns $6.33 on average for a 6-pack of beer. So if you buy it at $12, you buy it at $18, the brewery is getting $6.33 on average, right? Where does that all go and what profit is left over at the end? First, craft beer is expensive. So looking at the pie chart here, that big blue section, the styles we make, like IPA, require tremendous raw materials inputs, sometimes 8 to 10x the amount if we were making it than if we were making a light lager, for example. We don't have the vertical integration, the packaging materials contracts, the control over supply chains that some of the world's very largest breweries do. So a full 46% of our cost goes into raw materials. That's malt, hops, other ingredients, packaging materials, cans, bottles, carbon dioxide, oxygen, cleaning chemicals, safety equipment for staff, laboratory supplies, kegs. Small breweries typically don't have the sort of automated equipment that improves labor efficiency. So that next red section there, we spend another 23% on labor and employee benefits. Moving over to yellow, figure in taxes, rent, utilities, auto and truck expenses, bar supplies, freight charges, delivery fees, kitchen and restaurant supplies, pest control, elevated wastewater and sewage fees, and you get another 11% of our 633 right there. Moving up to the orange section, dues to professional organizations, insurance, licenses and permits, professional and legal and accounting services, ongoing building maintenance, plus $50,000 plus in Oregon's relatively new corporate activities tax. You come another 13% up there. Freight side, my brewery makes it even tougher on ourselves since we became one of the only employee-owned breweries in the country. So we have a slew of additional administrative fees and payments that we make to our ESOP each year. What does that leave us with? About 25 cents. That's it. I've sold a 6-pack. I made $6.33. And when all is said and done, our staff, bills, and taxes are paid, the brewery's profited 25 cents. Increase our cost by another 25 cents per 6-pack, and we're officially running a nonprofit. Increase our cost by another 26 cents, and we're quickly going out of business. It sounds crazy. Now, to be fair, it always hasn't been this tight, nor does it have to be. If the market can move to a point where we say we can make, say, $6.75 instead of $6.33 per 6-pack in revenue, or if barley prices return to pre-2020 numbers where our raw materials cost drop to say $2.74, or if the labor market cooled, we could bring that cost closer to 18%. Then suddenly 25 cents, maybe we get it up to 56 cents. Maybe in some dream world in a few years from now, it's 96 cents. But that's not the market we're in today. There is just not that much juice to squeeze. Slide, please. The brewers in the state recognize the urgency and seriousness of the addiction problems in Oregon and the need to fund treatment services to receive sufficient, direct, well-managed funding. Our industry has long positioned itself as the alcohol beverage choice of moderation. Craft beer, especially because it is expensive and relatively low alcohol, backs into this role naturally in some ways. Our businesses have been witness to the impacts of alcohol abuse, the lack of timely treatment. It ruins careers and lives. It leads to blight on the streets of our storefronts. We suffer from addiction-related crimes. I'm married to a physician who himself doesn't drink. We have had long, complicated conversations about the dangers of alcohol and addiction. I don't gloss over or shy away from that conversation. I'm proud of my craft and my industry, and I know it's incumbent on producers to be part of the solution. around abuse. The data does not point to expensive craft beer as being the product category that drives alcohol use, but we want to play a role in helping solve the issue. Alcohol taxes are the third largest revenue source for the state right now, but only 3% of tax dollars from our businesses are being used for current programs. We know that our tax dollars are not being where they need to be to help address this complicated issue. Where does the other 97% go? Can it not be allocated more precisely? We know that increasing taxes to businesses and consumers alone does not curb dangerous behavior of consumption. We know that revenue alone is not the issue. The state has windfall forecasted. What can be done with those monies that are already coming in? A tax increase right now, or in the next few years, will be a nail in the coffin for many small breweries across the state. In the alcohol ecosystem, producers make the smallest margin and are saddled with the highest tax liability. And yes, other states have higher excise tax rates than we do. Their beer industries contribute less to the economy and less to the tourism in those states, and provide, and the states benefit, and they often benefit from corporate tax rates that are substantially lower and provide offsets. I worry that rushing toward a decision which emphasizes tax and price increases without a real dive into data, without a plan for exactly how those new monies are going to be spent and change the dynamics of funding, that doing that would just put me and lots of other breweries out of business. I'm here today to speak as an industry advocate, not a policy expert, obviously. I said that breweries will happily come to the table, but I don't have a perfect solution to push here. Instead, in conclusion, I'd like to leave you all with a question that I think may lead to policy rather than a policy proposal. So I urge the members of the task force on behalf of the Brewers of Oregon that as you ponder and make recommendations to focus on answering this question. What are the ways that breweries and other alcohol beverage producers can help the treatment community achieve our shared goals without harming our businesses? What are the ways that breweries and the treatment community can work together to achieve our shared goals without harming our businesses? Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Great.
Would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm
I see that.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Chair Sanchez, thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Oregon wine industry. I am currently the director of wine education down at Winfield University, but I also serve on the Oregon Wine Board. My family also were previous owners of Ponzi Vineyards, and incidentally were the founders of the first craft brewing company here in Oregon. And I just wanted to add one note that was mentioned earlier about brew pubs. In 1985, no allowing brew pubs to be permitted. That is something that started here in Oregon that has actually happened now across our nation that has really improved the economies of very small towns all over this nation. It's something I think our state should be proud of. So, I wanted to give you a little bit of background as to who we are, why we're here. And yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a personal story. My family and a handful of other young families tracked across the country way back in the early 60s with a single focus in mind. It was to produce Pinot Noir. It wasn't just to make wine. It was because there are only certain places in the world where this wine grape can grow successfully. And at that time, in the mid-60s, the only other place making this particular varietal was France. In fact, it can be said that this wine industry was born out of its determination to produce some of the world's very best wine, with the most elusive, most difficult grape to grow. The early wine pioneers were focused on creating this high quality Pinot Noir to compete with some of the most finest Pinot Noirs, again, in the world. And that's why Oregon was our destination. It's why we didn't end up in Nebraska. We got the rain instead. Pinot Noir is a delicate fruit. It requires constant care and attention. It is a small cluster. It is a small berry. It is thin skinned. You can't just do this anywhere. It requires consistent cool climate, fertile soils to thrive. And it's the diverse soils of the Willamette Valley in particular that have resulted from the volcanic mountain range, the ancient floods, and the shifting of the ocean plates that has created some of this most rich soil. It is because of these two components, the soil and the climate, that Oregon winemakers have the ability to make these fine wines. Incidentally, it is also this cool climate. It's just the natural part of being here. It allows wines to be high acidity and very low alcohol. The original idea of the grape growers, of grape growing by our pioneers, was inspired by the Europeans and their culture, where they do enjoy wine in moderation as part of a civilized meal. Wine is not seen as it is here in this country as a cocktail or as a substance. Rather, it is a beverage that is actually enjoyed with consideration and in moderation. In fact, when I was a young girl, I remember installing our first highway sign out on Shullsbury Road, which is now a major highway. This is 1975, and the sign read Ponzi Vineyards, Oregon Table Wines. And that was very intentional. That word table was inserted there because we were trying to define exactly what this product was, and the fact that this is meant to be enjoyed on the table together with food. And it was always presented this way to me as a young person growing up. So as a result, I have a deep respect for wine when it is enjoyed in moderation. Likewise, I am appalled when it is not enjoyed and when it is used as substance. So as an industry, and particularly my job, was spent educating Oregonians, Americans, and the international market of how to enjoy these particular wines. And again, with food. Today, the industry has grown. We've got multiple varietals now. We've got growing areas all over the state, but the foundational values remain. And as wine producers, we recognize that we have this very unique place, and we respect this gift that we have been able to do here in producing these beautiful wines. So if you can move to the first slide, this is who we are today. We are not big alcohol, much like the craft brewers. In fact, again, my family initiated the craft brewing industry under very much of the same ideas and values. We have a unique position here in this state. Oregon only produces 1.5% of the US wine production. California's got about 84% of that production. We rank fourth under California, Washington, and New York. So again, we're small. We farm for quality, and that goes back to what I was saying before. We're not interested in big alcohol. We're not interested in mass production. We're looking for high quality. We always have. That means low yields. We have, as a result, some of the highest average wine prices in the United States. In some cases, 30% more than other regions. Nearly 75% of our wineries are small. Again, family-run operations. And we are all over the state, as I mentioned now. We're not only just in the Willamette Valley, of course, we're down south with Umpqua and the Rogue, we're up in Walla Walla, we're across the state to Snake River. We're all over. We've got about 1,500 grape growers, about 45,000 acres planted, and most of those are estate vineyards. And we're at almost 1,200 wineries and growing. Slide. So what's our economic impact? I'm pretty proud of this slide, starting from a little garage back in 1969. The fact that this industry has grown to contribute over $8 billion is substantial, especially when you look at other industries. Hospitality industry is about a $9 billion industry. Our tourism industry in the state covers around 12 billion, not that for our sector. We are also great contributors to providing jobs at 39,004 of jobs supported by our industry. And in terms of tourism, we are contributing $758 million. And that number is actually lower than it has been just due to COVID and our current situation with tourism. Slide. Again, we have this very deep commitment to rural Oregon. We've always been very tied to the land. We reach out all over the state, as I mentioned. I think the other thing I'm most proud of is that we, as a community, have been able to connect our community, which means we think about how can we do better? What more can we do? And we are a community that has given back to our vineyard stewards through an event called Salute, which provides healthcare across all of our vineyard workers. Iboy, which is another nonprofit, which is creating educational and professional opportunities for our vineyard stewards so that they can move up the ranks and move out of the vineyard into other positions. And we have always been and continue to be strong supporters of BIPOC and the AAPI communities. We are environmental stewards. 50% of our vineyards are certified in some way, biodynamic, organic, certified sustainable, and on it goes. We are leaders, in fact, in showing that we must do more than just be producers, but we need to think about how we can continue to restore our soils, our ecosystem health, and leave our land, our waters, and our climate in a better place than it was when we started. And I'm, again, very proud of the fact that Oregon has really initiated these programs that now we see in Middle America. They're finally realizing that they need to get back to the soil. That started here. Again, we've always thought of wine as something that we need to think of treating with responsibility and in moderation. And for most of us, we are considering wine as part of the meal. When we are running events, there's always food. It is how we show our wines. It is how we promote our product. Every tasting room has water available. Every tasting room offers food. And this has been going on from the beginning. Next slide. The other thing that's been remarkable is just the support of our state. Again, as a little girl, I can remember how the governors would take such great pride in taking Oregon wines on their trade missions to Japan or to Denmark or to Europe, wherever they went. And what a thrill, to have our wines in these other countries. And that kind of is something that I think is so special about what we can do in Oregon. But beyond that, we way back, we had the permitted use winery statute, which has allowed us to have tasting rooms, which has allowed us to educate people about wine, why we are here, how to enjoy it, which we do not take for granted. We understand that is an incredible thing to be able to bring people onto farmland and to teach them about what we're doing. And we control those events. We are allowed to have events, but we control them. It's just part of it. We're farmers just like our neighbors. We're one of the first states to allow the direct-to-consumer shipment, which has been extraordinary, especially to our small businesses. And again, thanks to the state back during COVID to allow those small businesses to have that direct-to-consumer was just a lifeline. So that has been the support of the state. The creation of the Oregon Wine Board back in the 1980s, 1983 to be exact, to provide ongoing research, marketing, and support and education. The Wine Country License Plate, which we work with Partnership in Travel Oregon. We've also partnered with Oregon State University for ages, for decades, over research for great wines. Research, we've received state funding for a smoke analysis lab. This is remarkable. It's the whole West Coast doesn't have anything like what we have here in terms of looking at smoke impact. And then federal funding for continued smoke impact research. Funding for tourism, again, always in partnership with Oregon Tourism in our efforts. And we've always had a great opportunity to reach international markets. And of course, that's just been remarkable. And I could go on and on, but I think that wine in general has really improved because we've been able to tell our story across the globe. Legislature to establish this lower privilege tax so that we would allow this industry to grow was very important to the pioneers, so that we would allow these small businesses to thrive. Fine. So challenges. A lot of what we're seeing is, of course, what my colleague has just been talking about in the brewing industry. We have a deep decline in wine consumption driven by all the alternative beverages, all the competition that we've got out there, a changing demographic. You saw the slide, reduction in drinking in terms of young people, which, by the way, I'm fine with that. I think they need to stay on script. Education is so important to young people when it comes to alcohol, understanding alcohol. We've seen a decrease in tourism, hoping that gets back, but it's not going to happen quickly. Our traffic to tasting rooms is down quite considerably, almost 10% down over just last year. Climate change brings with it, as you know, wildfires, droughts, freezes. I mean, as farmers, we're ready for just about anything. We thought we had it all figured out with doing this for 50 years, but it just continues to surprise us. So we have to stay astute to that. Along with it, new diseases, new pests in the farming area. And then, of course, increased input costs for making wine and growing grapes. The labor is huge for us, and that is because we are, as I said, farming for quality, which means we have put our investment in people, skilled people, into our vineyards. We frown upon a lot of machinery because, again, it doesn't help our soils to stay healthy. So we have really invested in our people. Today, we are paying very high wages. Of course, Oregon has one of the highest minimum hour wages. In addition, we also have overtime, which is kicked in, which that's in place and will be for the next, will start to climb up over the next few years. I think it's important to note that, with wine, we have that single vintage. We just have that 1 year to make it or break it. And so farming is so critical. So having skilled workers to really adjust and move as we need to based on the season is important. The recent inconsistent messaging, the lack of support that we just got recently over a really tough time, December, January. As you know, we have a dry January and obviously now apparently a dry February. So to get that lack of support in our toughest months has been very tough on our small businesses. Slide. Again, this is kind of going deeper into, where the costs are. I am no longer in the business of making wine, but my good colleague shared with me that costs are just continuing to go up. So yes, I talked about labor. We also have paid family leave and sick leave. But the costs of goods that go into making wine have really increased 30 to 50%, which I was just so astounded. I didn't realize it was up to 50%. Which is tremendous. So that's all these, the utilities have gone up, just the packaging, the glass, closures, materials, it's considerable. And of course, the taxes and fees continue to climb. Next slide. Again, we have the wine privilege tax, we have grape tonnage tax, out-of-state shipping fees, licensing fees from LCC continue to climb. The income tax is really high, one of the highest in the country. We also have the CAT tax for some of us that was a fun one to deal with a few years back. Property taxes really, again, gone up. And then the recent Portland Metro area tax and upcoming this EPR tax for recycling, which will add another 25 more cents to a bottle. So key takeaways, again, much like you just heard from the craft brewing industry and the wine industry, what we see is it's just becoming much more difficult to become profitable as a wine grower and as a winery. Costs are considerably up and we have very slow sales. Again, we are on the long COVID, as you said, it's taking much longer to get out of this. Tourism and taste room traffic being down. And I guess for me, I was a commissioner on Travel Oregon until recently, and I think it's very important to note just the added value of wine in particular and supporting our state's economy. We work across the state, and I like to feel that we enhance the attraction of the state for folks both coming in and for us going out. And there's just tremendous value added. So any new taxes on producers will need to be absorbed by the producer, right? We don't have sales tax here still. So that tax hits us again and again and again. And we will get to a point where we just can't pass that cost on anymore because our prices are so high, we just won't be able to compete. And as we've already listened to Lester's report earlier, that, you know, the problem drinkers most likely will just shift to some other alternative and we'll just lose out of this flavor. And that would be detrimental, I believe, to the state of Oregon. So that's all I have. I probably was long-winded and I apologize, I'm kind of congested. But I want to leave with you with in earnest, and again, the code was so articulately saying this, that we as an industry, we want to find a way to work with you to find tools so we can educate and prevent this kind of abuse that's out there. It's not good for anybody. We are a responsible community. We want to help to make things better for all Oregonians. And so please, let's think about how we can strategize long-term on how we can make this a sustainable, positive thing for our state. And please work with us because we want to work with you. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Michelle McGrath. She's online. Yes, I thought it. Hey. Oh, I'm sorry. Todd, I want to hold questions until we get everybody through because we are running behind. So if you don't mind, if you could just hang on to your question, that would be helpful. Michelle.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking Chair Sanchez and the task force for allowing me to address you today. It's an honor to join my colleagues in beer and wine to share about our impact and the impact of the Oregon craft beverage market on the state of Oregon. I do want to apologize. I have a cold, which is why I'm joining online. So I'm sorry if I cough during my remarks. My name is Michelle McGrath, and I am the CEO of the American Cider Association. We are a Portland-based nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting and growing the U.S. cider industry, including the suppliers and partners that are essential to the health of our segment, such as American farmers and farm workers who are growing the apples and pears that are then transformed into cider and its pear counterpart, perry. I've been in my role for 8 years this June. Many trade associations have their CEOs based in Washington, D.C., but when I was being interviewed for my role, it was seen as a boon that I lived in Oregon because Oregon is at the epicenter of the developing U.S. cider culture. Additionally, my background in working closely with orchardists in the Columbia River Gorge and Hood River Valley, as well as with diversified farmers looking to earn shoulder season revenue through value-added products, was seen as essential background for promoting cider for what it is, a beverage that is the embodiment of apples, pears, farms, and nature. Across the United States, nearly half of all cider producers grow at least some of their own apples or pears to use in their cider production. In Oregon, 55% of all cideries are connected to an orchard, and those that are sourcing juice are doing so with juice pressed from Oregon and Washington grown apples that are being re-envisioned as cider rather than cold with no fruit future but to rot. In the apple industry, cold fruit refers to apples that have been removed or sorted out from the main batch due to various reasons, typically because they do not meet the quality standards required for sale as fresh produce. Cold fruit can include apples that are damaged, bruised, misshapen, or have other defects that make them unsuitable for retail. Therefore, the cider industry helps reduce food waste as it gives less than retail perfect apples and pears a chance at being put to use and maintain value. It is not only the cider industry claiming that cider is an important outlet for apple and pear farms, but in fact, the USDA and even the Oregon Department of Agriculture are both supportive of cider as a value-added product of importance. Market forces have left the cider industry extremely vulnerable to fluctuations in apple yield and the resulting price of juice. In Oregon, the record-breaking heat of the summer of 2021 devastated caneberry crops such as raspberries and blackberries, both popular cider co-ferments frequently sourced from Oregon farms. But even more impactful, the apple harvest that year was down double digits according to some estimates. By Q1 of the following year, juice costs had skyrocketed, with price increases over 100%, putting many important cideries out of business. To illustrate the impact of juice costs on margins, Two Town Cider House, a regional cidery based in Corvallis, Oregon, saw volume growth in 2022, but experienced a loss in net revenue due to increasing juice prices. Juice prices have remained unpredictable ever since. Additionally, rising packaging costs, supply chain interruptions, increasing freight and labor costs have brought many Oregon cideries to the brink. And in fact, Oregon has seen more cideries close than any other state since 2020, and nearly twice as many cideries closing than opening during that 4-year period, including the closure of arguably the most iconic hard cidery in the world, Reverend Knapp's. Cideries face difficult margins due to being sold and often consumed like beer, but being produced and generally taxed like wine, with the addition of expensive base ingredients. Cider is mistakenly thought of as a commodity beverage, but apple juice, even as part of a cold fruit stream, is not cheap. And although most cideries build fluctuations in price into their business models, extreme fluctuations due to fire, frost, and heat waves are challenging not only for cideries who rely on juice, but also for those utilizing their own apples for their production. Earlier this year, the American Cider Association held our annual conference, CiderCon, in Portland, Oregon, with the support of our partners at Northwest Cider Association. CiderCon was originally founded in Salem, Oregon in 2010, and it has become the mecca for cider industry professionals across the globe. Prior to this, the last time CiderCon was held in Oregon was 2016. But this year, in late January, CiderCon was pleased to return to its Oregon roots. However, it did coincide with Oregon's unprecedented ice storm, and that is not what we had hoped for. But despite over 100 attendees not being able to participate due to flight cancellations or icy roads, registration was 20% more than the previous year, and CiderCon 2024 attendance exceeded any prior CiderCon's year's attendance, despite challenging weather conditions. We can proudly say that the Pacific Northwest is world-renowned for its cider industry, and CiderCon being held in Oregon this year drew a large and international audience. Oregon's cider industry is revered worldwide. And as well, across the United States. It is not just Oregonians who appreciate Oregon cider. Over half of the cider being produced in Oregon is exported to other U.S. states, and hundreds of people come from around the world annually to tour Oregon's cideries. One of the unique attributes of the cider industry is the relatively low cost to begin. Expensive equipment is necessary to create a shelf-stable product for scaling up, but if your customer is local, a cidery can hit the ground running for less than $50,000. This means that there are more opportunities for traditionally disenfranchised individuals. This is reflected in the makeup of the industry in the Pacific Northwest, where over half of the cideries are majority owned by women, and half of the employees in the industry are women as well. Women cider makers like Hood River's Teresa Draper, Draper Girls, making cider from the fruit she grows in the Hood River Valley to sell in her farm stand and at the Portland Farmers Market each Saturday. Or Parkdale's Katrina Galloway of Golden Row Cider, also a multi-generational Hood River Valley orchardist, making cider for her destination tasting room, attracting a steady stream of tourists to her rural community all summer long. Or the Applegate Valley's Erin Chaparro of Blossom Barn Cider, creating community by giving the traditional pears of the region a new path. Or Christine Walter of Jervis's Bauman Cider, drawing international acclaim for the cider she makes using the apples raised on her family's farm founded in 1895. I could go on and on about the incredible people in the Oregon cider industry, but the key takeaways are that cider is an important part of Oregon's value-added agricultural economy, and many orchards rely on the industry to create value for their culls or to add off-season revenue. And Oregon holds a unique and treasured place in the global cider story. But apples are expensive and at the whim of the weather, and nobody gets into cider because it's easy. The cider industry does not deny that there is a need for improved access to alcohol addiction services, but we propose that it is worth pursuing as a collaboration between service providers and the beverage industry. I believe that we can find a solution that will not eliminate an important outlet for our state's cherished agriculture sector, and a solution that will keep the many small mom and pop cideries that draw agri-tourists into Oregon's rural communities open and thriving. There are 70 producers in Oregon, an estimate, and only a handful of them are based in Oregon's urban communities. I take alcohol addiction very seriously. My own life has been personally touched by it. I was adopted at birth, but had the privilege to know my birth mother. In 2022, my birth mother succumbed to her lifelong alcohol addiction, passing away in a shelter in Colorado after choosing alcohol over housing and food for decades. If I thought raising taxes on alcohol would have helped her, I would be singing a different tune. But based on what I've read and based on knowing her, I firmly believe it would have simply drawn her ultimate conclusion faster. My hope for others is that we can utilize the resources available and the best science in the best way possible to address the root causes of the disease for the sake of Oregonians, as well as for the sake of Oregon's cider industry and its apple and pear growers. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Okay, folks, I'm going to start here because I just want to be very, 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 very clear that inflation affects every single industry in this entire country. It's affecting, and climate change does too. If your product in any way, shape, or form comes from the earth, you're going to be affected. So inflation will, I mean, you know, I run a nonprofit, but those people need to get paid better as well. So I understand that. I understand overtime. I understand paid leave. And trust me, I understand paid leave. It's killing me too, as a nonprofit. But I want to be really, really clear here. Increases in costs are every single place, and I get that. The pandemic has done us no favors whatsoever, nor has climate change. And for those of you who are presenting, I appreciate very much that there's that question about where does the money go? Those presentations happened earlier, and we'll continue to have those conversations, but they go into cities and counties. And cities and counties make their choices about what they will do with them based on their needs. And there's a lot of it is health related for the counties, criminal justice related for the city. And those things are major pieces in this process. And I will tell you very clearly as well, it has never been my intention to damage small business, because as the co-chair of Ways and Means and the person who is like trying to distribute the resources, recognizing the resources coming in is hugely important, and the impact that business has on this state. But I also want you to recognize that we are hugely unique in the entire country. The state of Oregon, you talk about how you know our lands are with the volcanic and you know like all the industry development here. Yes, we are very, very unique. We are also the only crazy pants state that has a kicker. Mm-hmm. We are one of very few states in this country, I think there may be one or two more, that doesn't have a sales tax. We also have passed in the past measures 5 and 50 that determine how we distribute resources to lots of systems in this state. We are extremely unique in how we do resources. And I would just also be very, very clear that I've talked to many of you in the past. The beer and wine tax has not been increased in over 40 years. So that's what I come to address. I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that, you know, I mean, and I will be very, very clear about this. And I've been very clear to many people about this. Yes, the bills that I have put forward have been massively scary. And I referred to that in the very beginning of this task force as an opening salvo because people would not talk to me about how we go about the process. Now that was scary, yes, but here we are sitting in the process. I have every intention of hearing as many different options as we can to figure out how we do this differently. But I would also encourage every single one of you and like look to your industries and the people that you serve and the people that work for you and the whole, gamut of everyone to say, how do we change Oregon's structure for the way we do business and how we bring in resources? Because we're crazy. The fact that we have the kicker, the fact that we have some of the highest personal income taxes in the country is ridiculous. We have a tax structure that does not work in this state, or it works for some people and not the rest of us who are doing the work on the ground. So I give you that and say it is not my intention to hurt small business in any way, shape, or form. My intention is to figure out this piece because as someone who's worked in the field of addictions and human services and recognizing how difficult a place we are in this state and in this country with regard to addictions is huge. And we have to figure that out because what we also are missing is a labor force that right now is doing something entirely different. And they could be working at some of the very businesses that we're talking about. Because people struggle. And again, that was an issue I think that was pre-pandemic and got worse with the pandemic. And we figure out how we go forward from here. So I just wanted to say again, I am very, very open to being a partner in this conversation, figuring out the best options. Again, never my intention to increase the taxes at the rate that scared the crap out of you, but I will apologize for, but it was really, in my opinion, the best way to get people to come to the table and have the conversation. So, questions? No, I think I'm sorry. Well, yeah, I think who's first on there, Todd.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments. I think for me it was good in the last two slides and then with your discussion there, or the last two slide decks, and then in your discussion there, to hear a little bit more of a collaborative sort of spirit or appreciation of all of the complex factors that go into some really serious issues on both sides. One of the things that I wanted to mention, I imagine it was completely unintentional, is in one of the slides or during one of the presentations, the suggestion of that or the statement that in European cultures, this is the way that things are done, kind of has an undertone, again, probably unintentional, that the problem, or that the problem is non-European cultures and the way that they consume alcohol. I think the health outcomes and the disparities in those are pretty pronounced, and from the standpoint of ensuring that what I hope that we can focus on collectively is the outcomes of reducing the human cost of irresponsible drinking and reducing health inequities. It's been, I heard a lot of positive intention, and also I think we have to be responsible for and paying attention to the outcomes. John Powell has well documented that focusing on intentions doesn't lead necessarily to good outcomes, and that a lot of the times when we focus on intentions only without really focusing on equity from the beginning, and the outcomes that we're looking for, that even the most well-intentioned things can broaden rather than narrowing the existing inequities that are already pretty substantial. So I just wanted to mention those two things, and that maybe we can be mindful about how we talk about things, and also that we can focus collectively together on what is a really complex issue, not from the standpoint of addictions treatment versus the alcohol industry, but on collectively how do we focus on these outcomes that again, reducing the human costs of irresponsible drinking and reducing those health inequities as the outcomes that we want to target, and understanding that what we do here in this situation is an important piece, but a small piece of the overall, how do we as a state overall address those issues?
So Todd, thank you for that. I would appreciate actually the CCOs having some contribution to the conversation, because I think the question of addictions sort of pre-pandemic, post-pandemic would be really important, as well as overall sort of mental health supports and things of that nature that the CCOs clearly have some impact on, or should be able to have some of the conversation about. That would be really, really important to know here for this group of folks as well, because it's obviously overall health is a huge issue, right? Yes, ma'am.
May I just respond, because I appreciated the comment. And the reason I used the European language there is just because that was the original idea.
Sure.
Of producing wine here. I want to make sure that I'm very clear that there's addiction issues and alcoholism issues that all over the globe in every culture. So I was just simply using that as a context of why the original people came here. It was very unusual in the days in the 60s and the early 70s to think of wine as a beverage that you would share on the table. This was the day of Annie Green Springs and checking it back in your car. And so when we came in, it was a very different purpose and intention. I also, if I could, just say one thing about when I think about long-term strategy, education is really the basis of everything, and allows you to gain knowledge so that you know how to behave and how to grow. And one thing that I think that we lack in this country is education on understanding alcohol and how it can be used. I was on a college campus, and I've seen incredible scenes of over abuse and over consumption by young people who are not of a legal drinking age. Actually, shouldn't even matter what age you are. The behavior and the way that is being allowed, I find terrible. To me, it makes me emotional. That is not how alcohol should or could be perceived. So I think and when we're talking about long-term strategies, somewhere in there, we're going to have to talk about how we talk about alcohol at an early stage. I'm not talking about scaring young children in the days of DARE, because that also made me emotional. That doesn't help. Scare treatments, to me, don't help. Giving people information so that they can make healthy decisions for themselves, I do believe helps. And I don't know if we do enough in terms of that with the younger people. I just want to, I know I'm not on your task force. I'm just supposed to, I want to share that with you.
I appreciate that. Societal norms are extremely different all over right now. And so it makes it very, very difficult. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to add to that point. Culturally, I was raised Jewish, and alcohol is a part of ceremony and a part of Jewish life. And once you turn 13, there's a ceremony of bar mitzvah, and that's how you enter adulthood. And from that point in my life forward, alcohol was always available to me in the house under the surveillance of my family. And I had a very different experience growing up with alcohol than most of my non-Jewish friends, which were all of them, because I grew up in Irvine. I was pretty much the only one in the city. And, I thought it's strange how the taboo relation to alcohol for a lot of my friends caused them to act in ways that I didn't, wouldn't have made me comfortable, and it certainly wasn't the way that I was comfortable, using alcohol. And when I look at Jewish population, the percentage of the population that consumes alcohol is actually much higher because probably the cultural significance of wine in particular to ceremony. But the rate of alcohol abuse is much lower than the national average. So you see, again, I think a cultural significance can have a major impact. in the relationship with alcohol and how, I think you can see improvement there, just to kind of second that.
And ma'am?
Sure.
Okay, so Sarah Lochner again, mainly working for public health. So our perspective is definitely that we need better education and prevention from a young age so that folks know the dangers, they know how to consume responsibly. They also develop healthy coping mechanisms, so they learn how to deal with stress and life changes without over consuming alcohol. So our perspective is not to, again, like Chair Sanchez is saying, not to destroy your businesses, but to find a way to fund prevention programs. So we had a previous presentation in which from public health describing that prevention programs have been grossly underfunded for decades. We only get about $10 million for the entire state from the federal government, divided by 36 counties. That doesn't go very far, and it's been flat funded as long as anyone can remember. So from our perspective, we're looking for ways to try to fund that education and that prevention piece so that we are preventing substance use, misuse, and addiction disorders in the future. Without, we'll never build enough treatment to get ourselves out of this crisis without that prevention piece. So I appreciate what you delivered.
Thank you. Yeah, sir. So folks, we are at time. Look at that, miraculously, we didn't get to share the meeting over. I know that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Erin.
No, Erin had questions.
Oh, right.
Did they not?
Maybe we can address the next
Maybe.
session for,
Yeah.
again, I think the network adequacy does address a lot of surveillance of our usage rates.
Right.
That could really help speak into, some of the data holes that we've been seeing as far as, what our capacities actually are.
Okay. Thank you. And I knew we were going to run over on this one, so I wanted to make sure we got to everyone as much as we could. So thank you all, everyone, for your attendance, for your presentations, and for the work that we're all going to try to do going forward. So we are adjourned.